Hello, it's July the 2nd. Welcome along to Renew Every Morning. I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh and I'm so pleased that you're with me. So thank you for taking the time to stop by. We're continuing in our series of Postcards of Grace, and today I have a wonderful character to tell you about. His name is a little bit difficult to pronounce, but I tell you what, as hard as his name is to pronounce, his life was even harder to carry. And the name I'm thinking about is Mephibosheth. He is the one who was carried. Oh, I've talked about this character so many times in the past, and it's one of those stories that I just love to talk because it's such a beautiful story of restorative grace, and it's such a wonderful story about the heart of David, which I love so much. Let me quickly fill you in. David has the Davidic dynasty is about to take hold. Saul and his dynasty are now finished, and as was the case in these ancient times, when a new king, a new dynasty arose, everybody from the previous dynasty had to be destroyed, had to be purged because there was no uprisings allowed. And what happened at the time that David was anointed, Mephibosheth's nursing mother tried to help him to escape because he's a child from the lineage of Saul, and so the idea was let's get out of Dodge with this child. But as she ran out of the house, she tripped, and listen to this: he was crippled in the fall. Now watch for that because that will become significant to us in our storyline. So what happens is he's dropped during the chaos of this power change. There's a transition of power, and he becomes lame in both of his feet. So let's remember that. That's really important. Feet speak to us about standing, remember, particularly. And remember, the other notion here is that we also need to think quite carefully when we think about the language of cripple, particularly when we're looking in the scripture. We want to look at that at two different levels. We want to think about it and to use old language of the invalid, but also it's very important that you understand that it's not only a physical problem, it also becomes an emotional and a societal problem. So it's a double problem. If you are an invalid, you also are invalid. And it's that invalidation that potentially is an even bigger problem than the disability. All right, so he's literally evacuated, and he's completely forgotten about by the palace, and he's hidden in a place called Lo-Debar, a place which literally means no pasture. So this is the middle of nowhere. Wherever nowhere is, this is slap bang in the middle of it. He's a prince by birth, but he's a fugitive by circumstance. Now remember, do you see that? The gospel, sometimes we think that the gospel is for the down and outs, but actually the gospel is also for the up and outs. Yesterday we saw the case of Hagar. She comes from the line of Pharaoh. Today we see the story of Mephibosheth, and he comes from the line of Saul. So these are royal folks in that sense. But here's the point: grace finds him. All right. So David is comfortable. He's established in his kinghood, and he now is thinking very much about covenant love. Now you'll remember, won't you, that there was his dear friend was called Jonathan, and Jonathan showed him great kindness. And David asks a question, and it's a very powerful question he asks. Is there anyone left in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness, hesed, grace to, for Jonathan's sake? There must be somebody. I say, there's nobody. Everybody's out. There's no one left. But that question changes everything, because one of the attendants of David goes, well, do you know what? Now you come to mention it, there's Mephibosheth. Who? They said Mephibosheth. You remember he was crippled. He's lame in his feet. His nursing mother took him away. Anyway, he's a recluse. He's hidden in the middle of nowhere. Oh, okay. Now the thing is this: David says, "Well, go and get him." Now Mephibosheth isn't summoned because he's strategic. He's restored because he's not restored because he's strong. None of that. He's redeemed because of covenant. Now, I'm telling you, imagine the day for Mephibosheth, who's lived in anonymity, hidden away for fear of the king's reprisal, and he gets the knock on the door, and it's a guard from David's palace. The fear, the absolute sheer horror that must have just gone through poor Mephibosheth's little crippled body. And gingerly the door is answered, and they say, you need to come with us. Now, can you imagine what he's thinking on the way to David's palace? The trauma, they reliving all the trauma, thinking about, oh my goodness, I've been out of the way, I've tried to not bother anybody, and now I'm going to get killed. What in God's name is this? But now watch this. There's something interesting about Mephibosheth's name. I'll tell you this again and again and again during this series. Names are prophetic. Now, his name has two meanings. On the other hand, on one hand, it means the utterance of Baal, and you might think that he's having a bit of that time right now. And his name, therefore, is kind of entangled, if you like, in idolatry and shame. So that's one thing to bear in mind. And maybe there's something actually interesting that's a bit of a throw forward from the energy of his ancestor. That's worth just thinking about with Saul himself. Because, anyway, there we go. I'll go down a rabbit hole with this. Let me come back. But his name also means destroying shame. And this is so important because the whole point about the fall, let me just quickly backtrack there. When Adam fell, he said what? We were naked and ashamed. And so we know that fear and the knowing of nakedness and the feeling of shame is something that we attribute to sin and self-consciousness. And his name means the destroying of shame. So we can expect something really exciting to happen. And that's exactly what God does. That's what grace does. It destroys shame, always and ever the case. Even when his poor feet don't work, that doesn't stop God being at work for him. You see, he's not just dropped, he's damaged, but through no fault of his own. He's wounded by someone who meant to protect him. And here again may be a point that we just need to latch onto. Maybe you are someone that's been wounded by someone that was supposed to protect you. My goodness me, there are enough of us out there crippled by a history that we didn't choose, maybe, an emotional trauma-informed life that we're carrying, but yet grace finds a way to lift him and put him back on his feet. And here's something worth knowing, by the way. Mephibosheth was the son of Rizpah, and she herself was a concubine, so she is one of Saul's concubines, again in the margins. And God works in this kind of outside the circle bit. I love the way he kind of gleans the edge of society. Now, what happens? He's summoned to David's court, and he comes to David, and he says this. I mean, he drags his little body in through to the temple, and here's what he said. What do you want with a dead dog like me? Imagine that for a description. What have you to do with a dead dog like me? But he's summoned to the king's table, not just for a visit, but to stay. I mean, it is just glorious. David waves away all his protests, all his concerns. Again, it's the classic idea. There is no fear in love, and David represents the heart of God. And he says to him, listen, you're going to eat at my table always, David says to him, forever. Can you imagine the change in the countenance of Mephibosheth? I can just see him sat under that huge, great royal table, filled up with all of the lavish goods of kings and the finery and the things they eat, and his little crippled legs just sort of swinging underneath the table, just hardly able to believe himself. You see, he's not even treated like a guest. He's welcomed as family. And you know what? He couldn't walk himself in. He's probably carried in. And this is just such a super conscious shift of grace. You don't walk into your inheritance. Someone carried you into it. And that someone was the Christ. You didn't earn it. You didn't earn your place. That's not how it worked. You were remembered into it. And you don't have to be whole to be welcomed. That's the point. So here it is. If you've been dropped, if you've been feel forgotten, if shame has stolen your voice, hear this and hear this well. Grace still sets a place at the table for you. Lo, I have made a table for you in the midst of your enemies. Psalm 23 is coming writ large in this. Writ large. Grace sets a table and you have a seat. You haven't just been seen. You're summoned. You're not just spared. You're restored. May you be encouraged today, because I'm sure there's someone out there that needed to hear that. So Be encouraged. Let's keep together as we think about these postcards of grace. And if you've enjoyed it, then share it, click it, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll keep this conversation going. May God bless you today. Bye-bye.